Same fuck-ups and the same shit detail working at the same shithouse kind of office. You people lack for personal growth, you know that?
It's a temporary posting. Roles get you back at the end of the run.
If he wants me. Last I looked, I was high on his shit list.
Oh, then we did you a favor.
I wouldn't go that far. But fuck it. Who we chasing? Frank Sobotka?
How fucking good is he?
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Hello, and thank you again for joining us for Caught on the Wire. We're up to episode 5 of season 2 and ready to jump back into it. Toby, are you ready to... We're getting close to the middle of the season now, so...
I'm raring to go, yeah.
Things are really starting to pick up here, and this is another very dense episode, understandably. Before we jump in, just going to say thanks to Damon, who sent us in another set of emails. He's really put a lot of effort into these emails, sending us loads of details about his experiences, especially as a Baltimore resident. Talks about how Snoop came to the Catonsville Library and he met her while she was promoting her book. And talks more about the role that his dad had in season 3, because I know we mentioned that in the last episode. He said that he plays Pete Sinopoli. He's like one of Carcatie's lawyers' friends. You know that scene in the bar where they see Teresa D'Agostino?
Oh, yeah.
And he has to go over and convince her to be his campaign manager.
Oh, yeah, so is he one
of the people at the table is this guy's father.
That is cool.
So, yeah. So that's interesting. And yeah, just lots more information about sort of sites on the show. I mean, I wish I could read it all out, really, because it's all very interesting. But yeah, it's thank you very much, Damon, for sending that in. I do enjoy reading your emails, so if you've got anything else, do send them in. And same goes for anyone else.
Yeah, definitely.
Anything else you want to bring up before we get going with that recap?
No, not at all. I would just reflect you really saying that reading through Damon's emails was a lot of fun, and it's great that we've got a devoted listener that's really kind of involved with the show. As you say, his dad was in it, and he talked about going to I think the season 3 after show party, right, where he met most of the cast and crew. So it sounds like this guy's obviously got a lot that he can provide, a bit of behind the scenes knowledge potentially as we go through. So yeah, I'm glad Damon's on board with us. Right, so I know you've got quite a few sections to get through in this episode. Yeah, we're I'm trying to keep it down. We're at 11 today, and they're kind of split into larger chunks as well. So we have kind of 5 big chapters, and I've split those down as well because obviously some of them are really large. And we'll kick off today with the dock business and the opening strand, which involves Ziggy and the introduction of a new major character to the scene in the form of Cheese. So let's get going. So a white dealer called Frog makes sales in the east side. Ziggy arrives to collect his money from him. Frog's count is short and he tells Ziggy that the stash was stolen. Ziggy threatens him, but Frog remains indifferent. As Ziggy goes to drive away, he's blocked in. Eastside Lieutenant Cheese Wagstaff harasses Ziggy for the money he owes him. Cheese is far more effective at intimidating Ziggy than Ziggy was with Frog. Ziggy offers his new leather jacket as partial payment, but Cheese is unimpressed. Cheese has his men beat Ziggy and they take his car, telling him that if they have not been paid by Friday, he'll be dead on Saturday. Frog is on hand to see the whole encounter.
Yeah, so we're seeing the southeastern drug corners here.
That's right, yeah. It's kind of a white drug neighbourhood in the southeast, not too far from the docks.
And Frog and his wiggers, as they are referred to by Nick in a later episode, and they're sort of operating here, and and Ziggy's trying to get involved, it seems, and we see more of his kind of bluster, like he's constantly getting himself in these situations where he's messed up, and here we see him trying to get angry and trying to be intimidating, and that's not who he is at all. He just comes across as a bit pathetic in this scene.
Yeah,
I really kind of feel for him. I really feel a bit sorry for him because you can't even save him from himself, you know?
Definitely, there's clearly a big step between how he perceives himself and how the street perceives him, and there's clearly no kind of rep built up yet for him to be able to do these sorts of things. As much as he'd like to think he's a big man and can stand shoulder to shoulder with the street drug lords.
It's such a ridiculous shot when you see him and his really fancy coat getting into that big red sports car that he calls Princess. Like, it just comes together in that one shot, and you're like, it's just you can't imagine how he must look to those corner boys.
And he clearly hadn't devised a plan, had he? As soon as he found out that Frog was short, all he could really do as discipline was just tell him that, you'll see who you're messing with. Yeah. It's just kind of there's no actual consequences, unfortunately. But it's interesting to see how Cheese's crew arrives, and they've clearly come from a bit further north from Prop Joe's East Side crew. This is something that obviously we wouldn't know at this stage in the show, but it's revealed very soon afterwards. I think in the next episode that Cheese is one of Prop Joe's main men, and they run the streets to the north of this district. So we see they obviously have maybe some sort of truce with the white dealers in the southeast. And we see, I guess, that Ziggy's having to look further afield, further north perhaps, to get packages now that we saw that White Mike doesn't trust him anymore. So it's all kind of in step with Ziggy's arc so far. But we also saw that White Mike has the decency not to beat him up over it. We see very clearly here that the ghetto districts further north, the game is a lot more fierce, and this scene really goes to show it. So, yeah, I was a big fan
some
of
good
this
stuff
scene.
there. Yeah, nice. I mean, more than you say that Cheese is one of Prop Joe's main men. I mean, he's more than that. He's his nephew.
Yeah, very true, actually. Yeah.
So, I mean, he's got real. I think that Method Man is actually very good in The Wire. And I remember reading about an interview with David Simon where he had said that they got a lot of rappers that wanted to be on The Wire. They were supposedly contacted by a lot of rappers, not just like locally, but all around, that wanted to be part of sort of, I don't know, demonstrating the culture or something about it. They wanted to be part of it. But Method Man was supposedly the only one who came along and sort of treated it quite seriously and was saying, tell me about the part. And I mean, he does a really good job in this. And I quite like Cheese, the character, in a way.
Yeah, he's very good here. I think it was it Bird who's the other kind of rapper who makes it onto the show? There may be a third who I'm not quite recalling at the moment, but yeah, he does very well here. I do kind of feel that like he never really lives up to this introduction though. He seems to drop in and out of the show at various points as just a bit of a shallow arsehole character. But he's never quite as threatening as he's teased to be in this sequence. The way they kind of have the clambering up the car like a spider with the kind of in-car POV shot was very well done. And he really makes his claim as a force to be reckoned with. That you never really feel again. So I guess it's certainly not a criticism of Cheese, but I feel that this is perhaps one of his strongest scenes in the show. Peaking too early,
has a very
perhaps.
good opening, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the nice thing about this scene is that there's two sort of shows of force, and they're both a little bit comical. Again, in that sense, I mentioned it before about Omar, where there's like a comic book-esque kind of classic tale of someone trying to be a bully, and Ziggy's trying to be a bully and failing miserably. And then Cheese comes along, and he's almost like this sort of... he's got the whole act down. It's just going through the motions of, lumping him one and...
Yeah.
Taking his money, and
it was almost like he saw exactly. Yeah, he kind of saw Ziggy needing a bit of advice on how to be a street thug, and he just decided to come in and show him how it was really done.
It was a schooling.
Yeah,
it was a schooling.
Definitely. So just very, very, very strong. I think it's got Tom's favourite quote, stealing his thunder again. I seem to remember him always referencing the when he sees Ziggy's stash. Not even enough here to even call this shit money, man. So it's a great line from him. A very, very strong scene. Have you got anything else to add, or should we?
Well, I'm guessing Cheese didn't get that name because he's like lactose intolerant or something.
Yeah, as I'm sure we've heard from some other characters, cheese is it's slang for the dough, right?
Yes, money.
And he embodies the stuff, or most drug dealers do. Yeah.
So that's our opening with Ziggy.
Yep. Okay. So we then move on to the next part of this strand. So Nick Sobotka. This is about Nick's problems, really. Nick views a house with his girlfriend Amy. Elena happens to be the realtor, or the estate agent, as we might say in the UK. He argues with her about the area name. The asking price seems beyond Nick's means. Amy suggests that they rent somewhere. Nick drinks at Dolores' bar and finds Ziggy drowning his sorrows. Ziggy relates his problems and Nick chastises him for getting involved with drugs. Nick refuses to help Ziggy initially, but when he realises Ziggy is in danger of death and has no other way out, he tells Ziggy he has already given his share of their takings from the docks to Amy for an apartment. So later on, Nick and Lala visit Cheese to negotiate Ziggy's debt. Nick asks for the car back so that Ziggy can sell it to raise the money. Cheese offers another week and shows Nick that they have torched Ziggy's car. Lala drives Nick to give the bad news to Ziggy.
Whoa, that machine gun delivery there, Toby. That was you really rifled through that.
Yeah, I guess there's three major scenes there.
Yeah.
There's the Nick and Ziggy kind of briefing in the bar, and then the house viewing, and then we also have the Nick and Lala intimidation stuff later on. So, do you want to start with the Nick and Amy stuff, I guess, in the house?
Yeah, so there we have Elena popping up. So they're kind of some two character worlds crossing, which is kind of nice. And they're viewing this area, and again, we can see that there's this sense of trying to rise up, trying to get some social mobility. And classical music, I noticed, again, being used in the background to suggest some kind of higher class that people are trying to obtain.
Very good point.
And it used to be Nick's aunt's house.
That's right, Aunt
supposedly.
Treasy. Yeah.
And obviously the value's gone way up since he was last there.
Yeah.
And he just seems to have nothing but contempt for it all. And there's that really nice shot of when Nick steps outside and that BMW creeps into shot onto the left. There's a really good, I think we've mentioned it before actually, this video style in The Wire. Have we mentioned that before?
That's right. I think we mentioned it 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, it's a video on. I need to post it on the blog. I will do that. It's a video by a guy called Erland Lavik. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's on Vimeo. I'm going to put a link to it.
Yeah,
on the blog.
go for it. It's a Wire Bible.
Yeah, he makes a very good comment about this this scene and the way that the BMW is kind of framed very subtly and how The Wire delivers its message and the visual style of The Wire. So yeah, really nice part of that.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. It's a good scene. A lot more expensive than Nick anticipated, clearly. We also see a lot of contempt for the way that the estate agents are kind of changing the neighbourhood, and they're even renaming it from Locust Point to Federal Hill.
Ties in so nicely with what Stringer is learning about renaming his product.
Oh, absolutely! I have not made that connection.
Such a nice bit of parallel there.
Yeah.
When I heard them talking about changing the name, I was like, oh, there it is. It's that beautiful Wire parallels again.
Yeah.
It's a really good example of that, I think.
Definitely, yes. That's a very good point. Yeah. So it's I was pretty impressed with it. I wondered if they really meant to look around here, because I'm sure they would have got an idea that it was gentrifying, and it clearly can't be the cheapest neighbourhood in Baltimore. But then again, perhaps is it too dangerous to actually look in those neighbourhoods that are affordable to them? So
it's difficult to know how much experience they have of, or just knowledge of sort of buying houses and what to expect. I mean, one doesn't get the impression that Nick and Amy have spent a long time looking into it. They've kind of jumped at this, and now they've gone for something that they may be familiar with, i.e. the aunt's house, and shocked to find what they do. Yeah,
it speaks to your social mobility idea again, doesn't it? That they're not really willing to branch out. That they want to stay in the point where they know that they've kind of grown up and that's all they know. And unfortunately, it sounds like the yuppies are coming along and gentrifying it, and putting it outside their price range. So a lot of contempt for them. What did you think about the other stuff with Ziggy and Lala? So it's the bit where I think Nick speaks with Ziggy, and Ziggy explains how he needs the money, and then Nick refuses to help him again. And then obviously he uses Lala to come along and intimidate the East Siders. And we see that Cheese has decided to burn his car in another great scene, with a very, very more obvious than usual visual metaphor for The Wire, where Ziggy's number plate burns. And yeah, I was quite impressed with everything that went on there.
Yeah, it's a nice shot of the camera literally leading us towards the fire. But it did look like the car had only just been set alight. As in they'd kind of like known that they were coming.
Yeah, I
set
thought
the
that
car
as well.
alight. And then I don't know. That
Yeah, it's almost like they had foreseen this coming, and they'd set the petrol trail for its very happening, which I doubt they would have done. But I guess it's also our first view of the East Side, the proper East Side rival to the West Side drug corners in the show. I don't think we've seen the East yet, so
no.
They're probably filmed in all sorts of parts of Baltimore, but I know that this is the first time that we've kind of had the scene set over there. So it's nice to get the two kind of clans set up.
Also worth mentioning in this strand of Ziggy and Nick, there's quite a few moments where Ziggy is quite desperate to appear street, to be using the language of the street, especially obviously the black people on the street, and this comes up again later on with Kima and Carver when they talking about white people stealing everything when they hear they hear Frog talking outside.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's Ziggy's caught up in that as well. He's so desperate to appear like he's one of whoever it is that he wants to be. He wants to be a gangster, I guess.
Yeah, and he just doesn't.
He thinks using that kind of language is the way to go about it, and Nick picks him up on it as well. Not that Ziggy seems to notice.
Yeah, very true. Okay, should we do number 3?
Yep.
So this is the final part of the doc business, and this is the stuff that goes on with the Greeks a little bit later. So at the Greeks' cafe, Nick reports the summons, which we'll get to during the Jane Doe strand, to Sergei Malatov and Spiros, and requests that they put their smuggling on hold on behalf of Frank. Vondas assures Nick that the Jane Doe investigation will find only dead ends. Nick tells him that Frank wants to meet with the Greek himself. Vondas asks Nick about smuggling chemicals. Nick asks what they would be used for, and Vondas tells them it's just business. The Greek discusses the police investigation with Vondas. The Greek refuses to meet with Sobotka, but tells Vondas to double his payment. Sobotka is dismissive of the offer and angry that the Greek would not meet with him. Vondas then points out the closed steel factories, leaving Frank to ponder the fate of his union if he cuts his ties to the Greek. Ziggy and Nick then look up the chemicals that Vondas asked them to obtain in the library. They find that they are used for processing drugs. Frank eventually accepts the Greek's business once the pay is tripled.
Ooh, another big block there. So if we start with the Greek's cafe, and we have Nick telling Sergei and Spiros about the summons.
Yeah. So I thought it was very brave of Nick to give Horse's name to Spiros, and we see how much Nick really trusts and respects the Greek's operation in general. You get the sense that that's what he really aspires to as a man who's up and coming in this world. And it's both ways as well. Spiros has a lot of respect for the way Nick holds business, and we see that Nick is still not sold on the idea of these chemicals, following Frank's harsh words about the cameras. And we see that Frank is now intending to put the Greek smuggling on hold whilst the port is under investigation. But lo and behold, the Greek comes along, lets the money do the talking, and Frank comes straight back. Although it does take it up to triple, I think, for it to work, doesn't it? I think he rejects the double, but once the triple's dangled in front of him, there's no turning back. So it's quite tragic, really, to see how as long as you've got some money, you can always get what you want.
I would like to think that Nick's vigilance towards the chemicals does draw from the fact that he is a lot more conscientious as a character, generally speaking. Like, we do see a lot of sort of, I guess, moral bankruptcy throughout the show in order to get rich. We do see an awful lot of that.
Yeah.
And that Nick is one of these characters who does engage with criminal activity, but not without a conscience, And this is kind of hammered home in his desire to make sure that there's not. He says, "Is it bombs? I'm not down for that." And although you could say it's about the gravity of doing something like being involved in something like that and the attention that it draws, I'd like to think that with Nick it is also, he's not willing to get involved in something that's so directly going to cause harm.
Absolutely, it's got to sit on your mind, and it's certainly tricky. And you see that he really wants that money, and the show keeps throwing us new reasons for Nick to go and chase the cheese. But he's also, as you say, very torn with this kind of criminal mindset. Can I really go down this path and label myself a crook? Or it's a very, very clear conflict for him, which works really well for the character.
Yeah, it's nice to see his development towards understanding the criminal world and treating it with respect, and the exact opposite of Ziggy, basically, who wants to jump right in and suddenly he's part of it all. He doesn't need to learn, he already thinks he knows it all.
Yeah. I guess the next part of that is then where Vondus meets with Frank. Frank assuming he was going to meet the Greek, but doesn't get to. And we also have our epigraph for the episode spoken in that scene.
Yes, that's right. Frank getting a very harsh reminder of what it would mean if he were serious and he really did want to cut ties with the Greeks. I think that he's obviously a very passionate man, and he certainly wants to try and be very principled, and he wants to make a stand against Spiros here because he demands to see the Greek and he doesn't get to see him. And again, I guess he kind of has that in common with Ziggy. There's a father-son element here, that they do make a loaded noise and sort of fight back very verbally, but when it comes to the action, they're very boxed in what they can actually achieve. And Spiros, I think, hammers that home for Frank here. Smoke from the stacks, but inside, and then he doesn't need to say it's obvious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think Frank really knows here that he cannot afford to be making big jumps like that when he's been so willing to get involved in the past, because now he's relying on it whether he likes it or not.
Yeah, too far in.
And that's why that triple really reels him in, because and the Greeks know it, don't they? I think you mentioned before in a previous episode how the Greek is, just let the money talk, and we have it here.
Absolutely, it works a wonder. And as you say, it's pure emotional manipulation, referring to those steelworks across the way.
I quite like the mystery of how rich the Greeks are.
Yeah,
because they don't show any fanciness, do they?
They're the anti-Ziggy. It's all about the money but no show. So yeah, they're by far the smartest people on the show, quite arguably. Especially
when you compare it to, say, Avon and Stringer, and they're talking about getting houses and having a nice place and people being looked after, and there's none of that kind of family or warmth with the Greeks. It's just business. It's just they make their money and they don't need to splash it around. Yeah, although we do see that, once they've done their work for the day, once they clock out, they do tend to indulge in the finer things in life. I think we see Spiros in a really nice, expensive suit later on at a nice hotel. They indulge, no doubt. Yeah, but they're just not. When it comes to their business, there's just none of that. Yeah. It's literally the sloppiest it could be, isn't it? Over in Johnny's Diner, which never seems to be a particularly endearing place. And I guess the final bit is where we see, as we referred to in a previous episode, Ziggy teaching Nick about the internet and how to use a search engine on a very ancient-looking MSN search that really dates the show. I can only assume that this is a time before there were site blockers on computers in the library. I don't know about you, but every time I've tried to use the internet in the library, it's been impossible to find the site you want because they seem to block everything. So how they managed to reach a site that was like how to make drugs? It was like this. It's kind of comical. It was a ridiculous website. Hello, kids. Yeah. Here's how we make cocaine. It's the very conveniently helpful makeshift site that someone seems to have rustled it up just for this scene. I also don't know why they didn't jump to the processing drugs idea without the internet, because it seemed like an obvious kind of reason to grab chemicals, but particularly as Herc says drugs are the crime to end all crimes in Baltimore, or what other crime is there? But
it gave us a nice chance to see Ziggy's skills. He's not a skillless person. He's quite, as we said before, technologically aware.
Yeah, and the fact that it is a bit of a shame. I think we mentioned it in the last episode that there's these sort of characters with potential, and they've just been unlucky enough to be born in a family that wants to keep them on a very set track.
Yep. Yeah. I guess the final part of this is the final scene where Frank and Nick talk about the next cans on the Wilhelmina that they're going to smuggle off, and we see Nick kind of repaint Spiros' epigraph. Today we got ships Uncle Frank, but the writing's on the wall, and that kind of throws him over into going with the triple.
Yep. For all of his rebuttals for the police officers and for detectives, sorry, and for Spiros, he just collapses when it comes to the money.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so that's our largest big chunk. That's the dock business. We'll go on to the Barksdales now.
Righto.
We'll talk about first the inferior product strand. So a drug addict disparages the product in the pit, and Poot tries to restrain his dealers from beating the man. Pudding calls Bodie over from his tower. Bodie realizes that the problem is with their product's lack of quality and says that someone needs to tell Stringer. Stringer attends his economics class and asks his teacher, Mr. Lucas, for advice about selling an inferior product in an aggressive marketplace. Lucas tells him to decrease price to increase market share, possibly even operating at a loss. He warns Stringer that the product will also lose credibility if this price is continually low.
Okay, so first off, we have Poot appearing for the first time in season 2.
It's excellent to go back to the pit, isn't it? It's a really nice kind of nostalgia burst almost.
Yeah, it was great, and it's pretty much things the same as it ever was, as Carver says.
Well, it certainly seems to be a bit more raggedy without D running the ship, and we see that Poot doesn't quite have the presence to actually adopt a manager's role effectively. He doesn't really hold much sway when he tries to control the dealers who are beating up random fools for, chatting shit about the product. So we see very much that Bodie has become the authority figure around here, both in the towers and in the pit. And he decides that the smart thing to do is to put up Stringer on it. So he's clearly learnt a lot from Stringer.
But it also shows how, one particular figure can disappear and then everything just goes straight back to that brutality and, like Bodie says, beating people up for no reason at all.
Yeah. I think this is mirrored quite nicely in the scene with Cheese, where we see the game is getting more fierce and the violence is getting more mindless. It's kind of a theme that runs through the episode and is a big impetus for setting up the co-op and changing the way the game works.
And then we have the bit in the community college, and we have Stringer learning a bit more on his basic economics. He learns about I've forgotten the name of the company that he mentions.
Is it WorldCom or something like that?
WorldCom, something like that.
Yeah.
And the director changing the name after being involved in a fraud case. And obviously Stringer gets the idea to change the name of his product and ends up bringing it to a bunch of his lieutenants, and they have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
Is that part of this section?
Yes, that's right. I included the training session, yeah. Yeah.
So he's picking up more tips from his economics class, basically.
Yeah, definitely. But it is also something they're familiar with, because in one of the first episodes of season 1, I remember Stringer schooling D'Angelo on how they're changing the caps and the name, and they're getting. I guess he's decided now that he's going to educate the whole crew and make sure that everyone is capable of understanding drugs as a business rather than just as a way of life, sort of thing. So,
and they seem to pick it up quite easily.
Yeah,
they seem to be very intuitive.
Absolutely, yeah.
Bodie showing some smarts.
They're really pushing the whole Bodie, the smart-ass porn thing, aren't they, in these scenes?
Yeah, that's true.
I can't really... I didn't realise that there was one of these scenes in Season 2. I thought they were all Season 3 onwards, where Stringer was really getting down and dirty with his minions and training him up. I seem to just remember Slim Charles's deep, gravelly voice answering most of the questions. So, yeah, it was great to see.
Is that it for that section?
Yeah, we'll move on to the second and final part of the Barksdale. This is the D'Angelo section. So, Donette visits D'Angelo with their son Terrell and tells him that Stringer has been supporting her and has plans to look after D'Angelo when he's released. D'Angelo is cynical about their motivations and tells Donette it's about business and not family. Stringer meets with Donette at home and she reports D'Angelo's troubled state of mind. Stringer visits the prison and discusses the problem with their product with Avon. He tells him that the East Side dealers Prop Joe and P.T. Dixon have the best product. Stringer asks about D and Avon says he has to find his own way. Stringer suggests that they put some property in D's name to give him something to come home to. Avon tells Stringer that D has taken a lot on for them and they owe him.
You can really see how in that scene where the opening one that you mentioned with Donette and D'Angelo, you really see that D'Angelo's focus is on the child and not on Donette who's talking. He's just kind of focusing on the child, and I imagine through his mind he's thinking about how that child is kind of trapped in the organisation that he's finally out of, or finally sort of wants to be out of. And he has to kind of watch his own son be caught up in all that. And Donette's lies as well. She's, I don't know, watching this again, I realised that she's quite a poisonous character, really. Like, although she doesn't do all that much, and she's not really fleshed out much as a character, she's just so kind of, she's just a massive tool, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, she's...
Like it's really so plainly obvious in these scenes that she's just there and she's getting everything sorted out for her and she's got everything sorted for her kid and she just lives off the Barksdale organisation, and when they say jump, she jumps. Like, she's quite a depressing character, really.
Yeah. Although, you know, finally she is pulling her weight finally. She's finally made a visit to D'Angelo after all this pressure, but you sense it's only for Stringer's benefit.
Yeah, of course.
And,
I mean, she just doesn't care at all.
Doesn't care at all about D'Angelo, and it's odd to see D so distant from his son as well. As you say, he was certainly entranced by him, but you kind of sense it was to do with his innocence and the fact that he's trapped the same way he once was, rather than the fact that this is his son who he probably hasn't seen for a few months.
Because we don't really see D'Angelo with his son very often, and he doesn't really kind of come across as an obviously very loving father. There's not much attention put on that. So, like you say, his focus is on this child being kind of trapped in that organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to see D saying things so wise, and his cynicism certainly very, very valid in this case. And D almost seems to be describing the Stringer on Barksdale kind of, because Avon is a family man. The show makes a big point of this. I guess in D's eyes, Avon has no love for him anymore. I'd say Avon disagrees there, but the hot shots really was the final straw for him. So it's certainly a tricky one. And I guess we move on to the Donette with Stringer scene.
It's kind of strange seeing Stringer kind of cradling the child. This kind of large, very intimidating man who we know is behind all sorts of very nasty dealings. Talks to the kid and says something like his father bucking his son or something like that. Yeah,
it's very, very dark, really, yeah. Well, because, I mean, Donette's reporting on what D'Angelo said at the prison, and she's kind of sealing his fate in the process, explaining how he's kind of bucking, I think is the way she refers to it. And, so it really is, there's a lot of gravitas to this scene that I think you don't really catch the first time. And as you say, it kind of concludes with that baby holding, sinister baby holding, having like a mock conversation where it's implied that D needs to be killed. I think you're right, says Stringer. So you kind of see the fate being sealed. A little bit odd. And then I guess the bit where Stringer then suggests to Avon that they should grab him some property in his name. I don't assume this is a final attempt at, helping D come back into the fold. I assume it's kind of creating an alibi so that no one suspects him once he's murdered. But it's interesting that he did suggest that to Avon.
Stringer's smart enough to know that he needs to demonstrate he's doing the right thing and that he's standing up for D'Angelo, and because it's all about family, etc., etc., etc. But, like I say, I think you're right. I think he's doing it out of a sense to not be a suspect. Yeah,
definitely.
But I think he already has it on his mind at this stage. He already knows what he's going to do.
I guess that's everything. I think some of the slang was quite funny to me in the Donette scene. It was little Donette know how to burn. She's apparently a good cook, which was followed by the scene where Ziggy's car is burnt too, which is a very, very tenuous kind of link.
Yeah, but, that's nice though.
But yeah, it's immediately followed. So it's something I sort of caught. Otherwise, I think we're probably I'm done as far as the D'Angelo strand goes.
Okay, so what's next? Got another big section coming up?
Yeah, we're now on to the Sobotka detail. So this is gathering the team, this first bit. So Daniels meets with Carver to offer him a position in the detail. Carver cannot understand why Daniels would consider him after he betrayed him when they worked together last season. Daniels tells him that he thinks he will not try anything similar as he's caught him once before. His condition for Carver is that he will not be recognised as a sergeant and will report to Detective Kima. Herc is overjoyed to be working with him again. Daniels briefs the new men. He orders DNRs and finance investigations to be done quickly to placate Valchek. He puts Greg's, Herc and Carver on the drug trade around the port, and Herc is pleased that he might get to do some undercover work for once, as the port dealers are largely white. Freeman arrives and impresses the detail by recognising Sobotka's photos. He tells them of the link to the Jane Doe's case. So we have here the big gathering of the team, and this is kind of the scene where everyone's kind of comfortable, and we've landed back in the rhythm of The Wire almost here now that the team is assembled and they're making a plan regarding DNRs and eventual plans to put out some wiretaps, that sort of thing. So it's really nice to see our favourite squad back together.
Yeah, the detail reunites here.
Yeah.
And we see a little callback to season 1, Carver getting a second chance, because obviously he was passing on information about the detail to Burrell in season 1.
Yep.
And Daniels obviously catches him, and he sort of says that he doesn't want Carver to make the same mistakes that he did early on in his career. He kind of says that he doesn't want to get involved in that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And here he's giving him a second chance, and like you say, he doesn't think that he'll do it again. So, he's got that trust for Carver. Must, despite everything that happened, especially right early in season 1 when Carver was, with Herc and Prez, and they were all really being shown out to be humps almost. Just to kind of, but with a lot more energy.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, certainly.
He's trying to cause more trouble. So yeah, it's nice that he's got the honour to give him the time again, and he's back in.
Yeah, there's no grudge held. It's certainly honourable, and I guess also probably feels a duty to see him land okay after their fatherly chats that they had towards the end of season 1. I guess he kind of perhaps feels a bit of affinity towards him on that respect. And
I like Carver's "same as it ever was" line. I think that's nice. Kind of referring to the fact that he'll be led by Kima, and as we saw again in season 1. Kima was really the one with all those street smarts. She did lead them anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
But obviously it's another one of those sort of catch-all phrases that just works for pretty much anything in The Wire.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just a kind of prosaic statement about the world of The Wire.
Same as it ever was. Yeah, there's an awful lot of kind of meaningful, kind of quotable lines, isn't there? But they always come across as quite natural, which is why The Wire is so great with its kind of quote lines. They never come across as forced, or very rarely do. You kind of imagine Herc's pestering probably made a big difference in bringing Carver back as well. I
think it's largely because the delivery of a lot of these lines, not just from the characters but also from the context of the show, they feel like they are sayings that have been passed down through kind of. They feel a bit more folklore-esque, I guess, than a lot of shows that use sort of more grand phrases like that. They feel a lot more dropped in, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And we see our kind of Batman and Robin reunited with all their funny antics.
Yeah.
Dick grabbing. And then we see that kind of Freeman and Prez are put on their kind of favourite perches, which is the DNR and finance investigation and the paper trail, and then we're left with our other 3 kind of doing the street stuff. And
is this the first time that he is referred to as Cool Lester Smooth? Because I can't think of another time.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
This is the first time, because it really does stick in terms of being a nickname, and I don't think it's said very often.
No. Yes, so it is.
I actually can't think of any other times that it happens off the top of my head. So.
Well, there you go.
It's just so enthusiastically delivered
It feels
That
like
line,
it's been called that forever, doesn't it? Yeah, but I guess you're right. It certainly is the first, as far as I'm aware. I just love Freeman's arrival in general, kind of blowing everyone's mind and filling them with confidence, as he already knows a lot about Frank through very legitimate means. The Jane Doe's investigation has kind of led to this guy through various mess ups that they made in the past. So.
Yeah.
It's a really nice way to bring them all together.
And we also have Daniels performing some of the same moves that he was supposedly all against in the first season, trying to protect the gains that he's made. He wants to get in charge of that new major crimes unit. He doesn't want to turn the detail into a big thing. This is a very kind of style of leadership that he was so against from his higher-ups in the first season.
Yeah.
So it's funny to see him performing that act so well himself.
Definitely.
But I think he's kind of brought round by Bunk in the end.
Yeah. Oh, of course, yeah, his wrestling with the angels scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's covered in the Jane Doe section, but we can of course cover it here. Shall I push on to our surveillance bit? Which is when Greggs, Carver, and Herc go out on site, as it were.
Yeah.
So Valchek receives another photo of his missing surveillance van at a different port, which is San Diego now. It's reached the west coast. He dusts it for prints. Greggs asks him about using the van, and he tells her he's loaned it to the Southwest District. Greggs, Carver, and Herc begin making hand-to-hands around the port. Greggs and Carver set up a surveillance post in a vacant apartment. Carver watches Frog berate another dealer for spending too much time with his girlfriend. Greggs is annoyed that Herc is taking a long time to prepare. Herc arrives and shows off his props to his colleagues. They find the dealers in the port area much less organised than their old targets in the Barksdale organisation.
And we started off there with a rare moment of police work from Valchek as he dusts that fingerprint off the photo. He's not entirely without motive in order to get that solved in the end. He's just going to do it his way. And again, Greggs comes in, asks where it is, tells the lie about the surveillance van. He's just keeping it as his own personal case for the time being.
Yeah, don't want to, the dishonour of finding out the truth.
But not out of a love of police work, out of a love of protecting
his ego,
saving face, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess we get the main event, which is our comedy interludes, I guess, this episode, with a lot of kind of montage-style surveillance from Herc, complete with props, toothpicks. It's hard to tell if he knows how much of a laughingstock he is in these scenes. I think he must know a little bit, but it's funny nonetheless, with his ridiculous toothpick.
But who is more clueless, Frog or Herc? Who is more clueless of how kind of ridiculous they end up being? Because whilst at first, what Herc is doing, Greggs and Carver find it funny, but very quickly, as Carver says, if he does that toothpick thing again, I'll stab him in the eye with it, or something like that. Very quickly, it just turns into like, all right, we got it. Like,
yeah, you think Frog and Herc might have a bit of an affinity.
You can't do this unironically. It's not okay.
Oh dear. And we obviously get Frog's ridiculous street talk that you referred to. It's kind of been ingrained into the street almost, and it's hard to know whether he's grown up with that culture or whether he decided to adopt it to kind of fit in more. I'm sure it was a bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say without kind of growing up in that kind of neighborhood yourself. I mean, I guess if that kind of language and culture is all around you, then irrespective of race, you'd kind of expect it for there to be a kind of, social, what do they call it? Social reproduction. Is what it's called. We really are seeing it through Greggs and Carver's viewpoint here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm inclined to believe them about them stealing it, but...
Definitely. I guess we also see that the boys are nowhere near as organised as the guys from the east and west sides, and they're obviously not organised by major multi-million kingpins, so it makes sense. They haven't quite got the reasons to be in the same league. but it's exactly reflecting what Herc said in that first episode about of this season about the white boys that he's currently working with are absolutely stupid. They won't take any precautions on the phone. They'll ask you when you want the drugs and where you want the drugs, and they'll come and give you them. So it makes rip and runs very, very simple for the police in this part of town.
It's also a nice throwback to the season 1 hand-to-hands that we had as part of the first detail. We kind of get another viewing of them here. Yeah.
Definitely. And then it's interesting that they're holding off anything to do with Freeman and Prez's money trail investigation for the moment. So I guess we'll have to wait until next week to find out how they got on.
Another good example of where The Wire sneaks in its diegetic music as well, with Herc turning up with the music blasting out of his car, and then obviously it's sat there and we're sort of seeing the montage of them getting the drugs and the music playing in the background. It's nice how The Wire kind of sneaks in an excuse to get some music in. And you really do not, you kind of don't notice it.
Yeah, it feels like a natural way for the montage to kind of play out, doesn't it? And you almost don't think about the fact that it has been expertly arranged as a diegetic source, which is what you want. It's been done well. Right, have you got anything else to say about the Sobotka detail, or shall we?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay, we're making good progress.
Let's move
actually.
on to the next one.
We're on to the Jane Does now. They've got another couple of sections. So this first one's about them pushing on with the investigation without Freeman. So Rules questions Freeman and Bunk about their case. He tells Freeman he has been detailed to the Southeastern District and recommends that Bunk bring in a fresh detective. Bunk, BD, Ray Cole and Mackie served grand jury summons on checkers at Frank Sobotka's Union who worked on the Atlantic Light, the ship that delivered the container that the girls were found in. This includes Johnny 50, whose nickname comes from drinking 53 beers at his 21st birthday, and Horseface. Sobotka is enraged that the detectives believe he knew anything about the girls.
And we start off with a bit of Lester and the Bunk looking very sorry for themselves. And Rules just continuing to be rather brutal.
Yeah, really nailing the arsehole boss role here, more than ever. Reassigning him casually in the midst of a progress check. And then obviously we get Freeman asking him if he just fucked him without giving him 1 inch of a chance to solve the case. And Rules responds in a very, quite aggressive, "You'll know, don't worry Freeman, you'll know," which I wondered whether that foreshadowed his downfall in Season 5, after Freeman goes off the rails.
And then we go on to where they give them the grand jury summons to the checkers. And I quite like Ray Cole's line about, if you lie to us, you hurt our feelings. But if you lie to them, it's perjury.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice.
It's really
just trying to bring up the fact that there's only so long that they're going to be able to hide behind their stubbornness. Although, as we see later on, they do a very good job of it. Was it the guy says to the Bunk, we even managed to get one of them to admit that it was near the water?
Yeah, that was a great line. Kind of proving everything that BD, Fid was true about these guys. And yeah, it was Ray Cole's moment to shine, definitely, with his perjury one-liner. And then obviously that's followed by, well, we get a bit of whistling first to kind of round out what we saw last week. And then it's followed by one of 2 or 3, I think, in this season, major kind of Frank Sobotka soliloquies. The Uni and Buster Soliloquy.
This is a very, very popular one, yeah. And rightly so.
Yeah. And we see that, most previous administrations have been trying to, quash the unions, and it's not a new issue for them. And Frank really pours his heart out to these guys. And you kind of, I think Bunk is somewhat moved by it, but he's not going to crack as any good detective wouldn't. Yeah, that's what you sense anyway.
Yeah, there's a look of sort of the, are you finished? That's the way that Bunk seems to look to me. When Frank finishes his outburst, there's just a kind of sense of contempt. But I think you're right. I think it would be hard not to be moved somewhat by that, because Frank, as I've said before, is very passionate man. We kind of see his roots to the Union, and we see his dedication to the Union, and the fact that there is this brotherhood between him and the other stevedores.
Yeah. Okay, so should we move on to the second part of the Jane Does? This is about the computer. So, well, first of all, we have the grand jury prosecutor, who informs Bunk that the hearings brought little information. Out of options, Bunk quizzes Russell about informants in the docks as a next lead. Is disappointed when she has none. Later, Russell visits an old flame in Sobotka's union, Maui, who we saw last week. She sounds him out about becoming an informant while he tries to reinitiate the relationship. He refuses to give her information on his fellow union men, but offers a tip. The union computers may be useful in tracking containers. Bunk later asks Daniels about the possibility of combining the Jane Doe's case with the Sobotka detail, as it is clear that their investigations are beginning to overlap.
Police is only as good as his informants.
Yeah.
And B.D. Russell is barely a police, never mind having any informants. I mean, she is trying to learn something here, and she does kind of follow Bunk's advice here. And goes after kind of quite a surprising character. We're kind of funny to think that those two would have been in a relationship at some point. Especially seeing as all that we've seen of Maui thus far is that, he doesn't like Ziggy.
Yeah.
That's kind of it, really. Suddenly he's here again.
And he was a very angry man, so it's nice to see this kind of very different use of him in the show here. It's quite tender kind of scenes, and a very ambiguous history is drawn. Well, it's not even drawn. It's that they explain nothing about what they were before. But it's nice to kind of have your theories, I guess. And Maui's understandably suspicious of this fairly obvious attempt to extract information from him, rather than for any kind of genuine rekindling needs. So,
well, he clearly has enough respect for BD in order to offer that tip. I mean, like you say, he doesn't give her any actual information, but it's a pretty big. I mean, to be led towards the actual infrastructure of what they're stealing from, is quite a big piece of information. And it's interesting how in season 1 the detail they kind of have to construct the machine or the infrastructure of their system themselves. They have to work out that they're using these codes and that they're contacting pages and doing all this and that. And then in season 2, they kind of get the computer infrastructure shown to them, like handed to them on a plate.
Yeah.
Because of this tip-off. So, yeah, this is a big step for the detail.
Yeah, it's their best lead so far. And it leads...
BD taking some initiative.
Yeah.
Which is interesting considering what we saw in last episode when she admitted that she didn't really have much of a motivation to be a police in the first place. She was doing it kind of for financial reasons and, needs and wants.
Yeah, she's caught that bug. And we see that leads to Frank's pretty convincing or lack of convincing speech about there being 160 cans lost as we speak on the docks. Perhaps done a little bit too forcefully, as Bunk certainly didn't buy it. It was clear that they were being played in that scene.
Yeah, he's trying to sort of overcomplicate the situation for them.
Yeah.
He's just kind of going for this show of, don't blame us. It's all messed up. Everything's messed up.
It's all about the radio waves. It's not us. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just trying to shift blame onto something that can't be prosecuted.
Yeah.
So it's just an attempt to overcomplicate things. But as you say, Bunk is smarter than that.
Yep. And going back to that, the guy, the grand jury prosecutor, there's a nice link with this guy. The guy who claims that he got one of them to swear the docks are actually near to the water. The guy, Gary De Pasquale is his name. He crops up a few times in the show, but most notably he's the ASA that Freeman trips up in the final episode of the whole show. And he manages to record him talking to Levy about leaking information from the court. And he's also the one that leaks information to Prop Joe from the courthouse. So he's got a lot going on behind the scenes despite his small role. And obviously the way they explain that's quite subtle as well. But he does crop up in the final episode again, and Freeman absolutely delivers a slam dunk on him. And then his real name is actually Gary Daddario, and he's the show's technical advisor on all things to do with the police. So he essentially vets every police scene for authenticity and makes sure everything appears true to life. And he's qualified for this role by being a real shift lieutenant in the homicide department at Baltimore, which was when Simon was doing his research for the book, the homicide book, and then the show as well. So I think he's got, he knows David Simon very well, and this guy's, one of the cameo roles that The Wire likes, where they kind of employ someone who's actually in real life in the show. He's almost not an actor, so
Just bringing in as much authenticity as possible.
yeah.
Gary Daddario.
Gary Daddario is the real name, and then his name on the show is Gary Di Pasquale.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
just a little change in the name.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. And I guess the final bit in this strand is where we see the threads merging, the Jane Does and the Sobotka detail. You've already touched on this.
Yeah, I did. I just kind of push into this slightly. Yeah, Daniel's again. He's protecting his detail because he wants to go into that major crimes unit, and Bunk sees that he really knows that he's up against it here. Like, as Rules has already said, he's one man and 14 red names, and he knows that he needs to kind of. He says you don't spread a case in homicide.
Yeah.
And he kind of needs that detail, and he needs that sort of approach from narcotics in order to be able to spread the case, make it something that they can actually solve. Because right now, he's pretty much fresh out of ideas. He kind of it's a lucky break for him to be able to get involved with the detail in this way if he can.
Yeah. So it's nice to see Daniels wrestling with the devil again, and he chooses an excellent option as well, getting all the benefits of combining the investigations but minimising his exposure to the risks, so that there's no official joining of forces, but they're allowed to set up on their site and exchange information. So it's clearly the right move to make.
Yeah, very smart move. Especially if he still wants to get what he wants at the end of it, which is his major crimes unit.
Definitely.
So that's the end of the Jane Does.
So that's it for the Jane Does. We now have just two more strands, and they're both about McNulty's antics in this episode.
Right.
So the first one is about Bubbles. So Bubbles visits the Marine unit to find Jimmy. McNulty is out on a boat, and Claude radios him to return to shore. Bubbles has more skill at sailing than McNulty. Bubbles reports that he's tracked down Omar. McNulty gives him some extra money, and Bubbles asks for more because of the danger he faced.
I guess the Baltimore knot.
Yeah.
And it's different every time.
One of my favourite Bub scenes, probably outside of season 5.
It is a very good scene, and I like how it starts with Bubbles trying to make nice with old Claude. Claude's just has absolutely nothing to offer him whatsoever. He just stands there looking at him, watching him like a hawk, not trusting him for a second. Like, doesn't have that kind of like going for the relatability like McNulty does.
Well, I mean, he was caught in the act of trying to steal a big barbecue by the looks of it that was tied to the lamppost. So didn't get off to the best of starts with him.
Is it? I mean, do we know that he was going to steal it?
I don't think we know. He was clearly showing an interest in it, its value for scrap metal. I would have thought that much.
Yeah,
anyway.
he was. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just great to see how much he's clearly more qualified for the job that Jimmy's doing than Jimmy is himself.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that he knows that the terminology, the cleat, something that I didn't know about. He's clearly an experienced man who's been through a lot. And
Were you never in the Scouts, Toby?
Ain't
you
my
learn
scene.
about knots and cleats and things like
Didn't
that.
learn about the cleat. Not me. But not only is he murdering Jimmy's boat skills, he solved one of Jimmy's manhunts. He found Omar, so he's, in many respects a better detective than he is right now. And he's quite rightfully demanding extra payment for it.
Yeah, McNulty seems to be very humoured by the fact that Bubbles ended up with a shotgun in his face, which to some extent you can see the humour behind it, but at the same time, Jimmy's in a very fortunate position to never really end up on the business end of a barrel of a gun, does he?
No, that's very true.
He does have things relatively safe, and he has, although he ends up in shit and he's got to be on the boat and he's not really qualified, but he doesn't really end up amongst that kind of violence in the same way that a lot of other characters do. And I found it very heartless for him to be kind of laughing at Bubbles in that way. I thought it was kind of considering what it was that Bubbles has gone through in order to pay this tax. I think it's a bit cruel to just laugh in his face like that. Doesn't show much sympathy.
Yeah, certainly desensitised to the violence of it all. Not nice. don't. Is this possibly one of the only scenes where we ever see Bubs not chasing drugs? I think it may well be.
Well, he's chasing money, which by extension is chasing for drugs. So
Yeah, true that.
I don't know.
True that.
It never really ends with Bubbles.
Yeah. So overall, a really, really good scene. One of my favourite Bubs scenes. Very humanising and really kind of shows off his intelligence and wide vocabulary and knowledge of the maritime stuff. And he doesn't have much to do at all in season 2. He's used very sparingly. Once he is out the ghetto and doing other things other than kind of roaming around with Johnny, I think we see what Bubs is capable of, and I really like all we see of that. And it expands very much in season 5 as well, which is a great season for Bubbles.
And he gives Omar. I assume it's like Omar's phone number or like a cell number.
Yeah, what does he give him in the end?
It's just a piece of paper, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting how there's that sort of ancient technology, and we see all this communications technology going about throughout the show, and there's still people passing phone numbers through paper at these kind of underground levels. Kind of nice.
Yeah, you can reach him on that number. That was it. Yeah. So it was. Yeah.
That must be worth quite a lot on the street, carrying around a bit of paper with Omar's number on it.
Very true. Should have sold that off. Right. We have our final strand. This one is about Omar and the floater. So McNulty brings Omar in to be interviewed by Eileen Nathan in preparation for the upcoming Bird trial. Nathan is surprised at Omar's candour and history, but she calls him a sociopath and worries about putting him on the stand in front of Levy. She gives McNulty a voucher to buy Omar some more appropriate clothes for a court appearance. Omar shops for clothes whilst McNulty visits the federal building and asks Special Agent Cleary if he can interview any vice suspects to try and interview them about the girl he found in the harbour. Cleary finds him some girls being held in New Jersey, but finds it hard to understand McNulty's desire to ID the girl. McNulty visits the girls, doesn't come up trumps, and heads back to Baltimore.
Lots and lots of humour in these sections, both sort of surreal and quite dark. And it starts off with the interview with Omar and Eileen Nathan, and McNulty's obviously very tickled by how candid Omar is being.
Yeah.
And he has his, was it Fish Gotta Swim sort of line.
Just making a very unconvincing case that he was a genuine eyeball witness. I guess, yeah, it was pretty hilarious overall. Yeah, I don't remember that line particularly, but it was everything he said kind of did tickle me a little bit, and I just think it's nice that we're seeing a plot thread from the very first episode continuing, and it shows that The Wire is very patient and it doesn't want to condense any of its storylines for ease of understanding. And I guess it's also a good demonstration of bureaucracy, because we saw that this murder that we witnessed in the first episode of William Gant was more than a year ago in terms of the show's chronology, and it's now finally being put to court. So it's a sense of how long things take in these big bureaucratic systems.
Yeah, that's very true. And then it moves on to that. Moves on to them going to buy clothes, and that's really surreal. That scene, and they stood there, and McNulty he says, "It's a look," and no, it ain't.
Yeah,
it's a really kind of weird, sort of funny, but just really kind of strange seeing these two shopping together.
Two characters who absolutely despise the thought of shopping, having to go and spend their £150 voucher, $150 voucher even, which is quite a generous handout from the court, really. So, yeah. Although it was strange that he let Omar out of his sight, considering he spent 4 or 5 episodes looking for him. I guess he was, dedicated to doing this court appearance now, but still, it perhaps was a little bit of an oversight.
Yeah, I guess he must trust him enough to know that he'll stick around.
Yeah.
Especially seeing as Omar kind of, or I'll be at the club or whatever. After McNulty's gone.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yeah.
He just kind of acts on his own will. Omar's sort of that uncontrollable neutral force. That
force unto himself, yeah. And we then see over the road that Immigration and Naturalization has become the Homeland Security Department. yet another allusion to the terrorist stance of America that it's shifting towards, and it turns from an exclusive name into it becomes an exclusive name rather than an inclusive name. It's Homeland Security is all about keeping everyone else out, whereas immigration and naturalization is about bringing people in. So it's kind of turning away from a positive outlook. And
doesn't Cleary say something like, "Do you feel safer yet?" Doesn't he say something? The sign changes over, and he's like, "Do you feel safer yet?"
Yeah, he was clearly having a laugh there. He was just as cynical as McNulty is about everything to do with that, I imagine. Yeah, so it was quite cool to see that.
And then, there's kind of a much darker piece of humour when he goes to see the girls and gets one of them to translate, and they have a look at these photos, and then one of them asks that if she knows one of the girls, does she get to stay?
That's it, yeah.
Sort of much darker bit of humour there.
Trying anything they can to break the system.
McNulty just gets nothing, doesn't he? We're kind of watching all of these scenes of him following it up, but in terms of progress that he's making, he's not making any.
Yeah, he's just trying very hard to find something constructive to do. Taking a day to try and track the girls, folks. A good chunk of driving here, a very nice thing to do. But it's you can understand why the immigration officer's confused by this, as the big bureaucratic systems don't have the resources to make these kind of checks, generally speaking. And McNulty's just stuck in a rut and needs something to do. So it makes sense, but
I'm not sure how much. I don't know, in terms of their contribution to the episode and to the show as a whole. Because it kind of doesn't lead anywhere, and it really is only used either as a bit of an excuse for a bit of humour, or, like you say, just to give Jimmy something to do. I'm not sure it really adds much to the episode. I think we wouldn't have missed much by not having these scenes.
Yeah, no, but I mean, yeah, definitely. Perhaps it's the show's scared to step away from its main character and to let McNulty drift off. I mean, it certainly isn't scared to do that later on, but at the moment, I guess he wants to keep him fairly much in the foreground, the grounding character. So perhaps that's one way of looking at it. Yeah. And I guess it's just odd that he thought he'd find a connection here. I would have, if you were present for Bunk, Lester and Beattie's chat with the FBI a couple of episodes ago, he may not be willing to go and see these Jersey girls, since there's a lot more Eastern European illegals out there than he may be imagining there are. There's something like 40,000 undocumented in the US alone. The chances that they'd have any connection were pretty slim, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much just going to some random holding cell and picking out some girls who just happen to be Eastern European. It's not really going to get him anywhere. He
could have gone down to Jessup and asked Avon the same question and got just as likely an answer from it. So it's a bit of a shot in the dark, but there you go. McNulty trying to sort himself out.
It does show how these things do happen. You end up with someone ending up dead, and there's just none of the people that they know will likely ever know, because there's no way to get that information across, and how we supposedly live in this world where everything's connected, and the internet and information passing so freely, and yet people are still capable of dying these sort of unknown deaths.
Yeah,
it's quite upsetting, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess the scene with the girls is you feel like it may have been subtitled in any other show, because it's quite a lengthy section of Russian. I assume it's Russian dialogue. So I thought it was ambiguous as to whether she's following McNulty's orders or chatting her own tune to them. Perhaps bad mouthing McNulty. We'll perhaps never know.
I mean, I can only really speculate on what they were saying.
Yeah.
But she seemed kind of angry and seemed like, wasn't really being all that cooperative. But then again, how could she be? We can't really expect her to know anything.
Nope.
She was probably irritated by that as well. The fact that they expected her to know something about just these random girls just because they happen to be from the same part of the country, and maybe this sense that they're being viewed as homogenous or something.
Yeah.
You're never quite sure how people could be taking it.
Definitely. If anyone speaks Russian, or if it's Polish or something like that, if anyone can decipher that, it'd be great if you can get in touch with us and see if we're right, see if they are bad-mouthing McNulty. That'd be great. But otherwise, I think that we're done for this week as far as our recap goes.
All right.
I'm done. I'm out. I don't need nothing more to do with you people. I don't need the trouble or the money. I got a union to run.
They used to make steel there, no? Smoke from the stacks, but inside.
And we now have our final 4 little mini sections. Should we start with the title?
Yeah, Undertow. We obviously have. I mean, the actual undertow itself is presumably being dragged under, being but it's a tide effect that like traps swimmers, isn't it? And
That's
like drags them under.
That's right, yeah.
And presumably, most obviously, it's referring to Frank Sobotka and the fact that he is somewhat ensnared in his smuggling operation.
Yep. Despite every intention he had, the money talked too loudly and lured him back in.
And the fact that the harder he tries to kick, he still somehow ends up deeper.
Yeah.
Because we do, in that sense, his kicking is the his verbal fight back, and the fact that he wants to appear very stubborn, he wants to appear like he's a stonewall, he's kind of, people are not going to break, but actually he just ends up going deeper, and he just gets offered more money, and he just continues to crumble.
Yeah. So it's, but obviously it's most perhaps explicitly referring to Frank, but it's again another very universal phrase you can attach to the show. Practically everyone in the show is trapped in their situation. Omar is perhaps arguably the only one who is free. So it's kind of a very universally applicable wire word and a nice ocean metaphor. As we know about the season 2 titles, like to dabble in the ocean metaphors every once in a while.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. Leading us into our epigraph then. They used to make steel there, no? Certainly one of the better ones this season, I think. And Vondas makes this comment in reference to the shutdown steelworks over the water, and talking about how death has kind of come to the work over that side of the river, as it may come to this side as well. And also perhaps referring to the illusion of work, the fact that there's smoke from the stacks but no steel, and the work has gone in place of crime, which is gradually becoming the case with the port terminal.
Yeah, Spiros trying to appeal to Frank's obvious desire to try and keep things going for his union and for the docks, and like you say, that sort of industrial decay is threatening, and people are turning to trying to cover it up and make it appear like things are still going as clockwork. And we get that as well later on when he's with Bunk and Beatty, and he's trying to overcomplicate the system, and he's trying to demonstrate that this is the way things operate. His smoke from the stacks is, cans just go missing.
Yeah.
And then there's that reality behind it. So, yeah, it is a nice epigraph, and it's certainly a lot stronger than more recent episodes. I think there's been quite a few weak ones we've had in the past few episodes.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
But this one feels a lot more hard-hitting, especially to Frank.
Yeah. I guess the one last thing to mention there is make steel, and I don't know if that's a very, very vague allusion to kind of play on words with stealing, but another reference to how the docks has more dishonest work going on than honest work these days. So, yeah, there's quite a few elements to it, and as you say, an excellent epigraph in what has been a few kind of less interesting ones recently.
So what do you think for any particular scenes you enjoyed out of this episode?
Very, very difficult this week. Probably the most difficult, actually. I think the opening's great. Elevates Cheese to a height that he'd never again reach, as far as I'm concerned. And I think the Barksdale stuff is great as well. Good seeing the low rises again. So I'd put maybe those two up there. And it's hard to forget about the Uni and Buster speech. it's impossible for me to really pick something from that selection, really. But those ones.
Yeah,
that...
it is a toughie. I mean, the Uni and Buster speech definitely has to come in there. It's pretty much given for this episode.
Yeah,
like you say. But I did really like the scene with Nick and Amy looking at houses. Really nice, careful demonstration of them sort of punching above their weight financially. And I also liked the scenes where we get back into the street work. And I feel like I liked the view of the street work because I know what's going to come. I know we have things like Fuzzy Dunlop that are about to grace our screens.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to getting more involved with that. And it was a nice, like I say, a nice throwback to what happened in season 1. And there's a nice bit of humour from Herc as well in his props, which I did think was very funny.
Absolutely. And that leads us on to our favourite characters. So, in a show where it's getting harder to choose among the ensemble as it expands, I think this week I'm going to have to give it to Cheese, because I don't think I'll ever give it to him again. This is clearly kind of... I think his introduction is fantastic. The way he clambers up that car like a spider really incites fear into whoever's watching, I think, really. And he really kind of has a lot of gravity behind him in this scene.
Yeah, I was going to say Cheese as well. I think that part of the problems that you mentioned with his character and the fact that he has such a grand opening and there isn't anything that... Likewise, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that hits quite the same way. I think it's just because he is maybe a bit underutilized as a character, and it would be nice for there to be a bit more development, especially when you have that kind of very theatrical beginning, and then just not much to follow up. But certainly in this episode, in terms of picking out characters, I think Cheese is a good choice.
I just remember watching the show for the first time and seeing that scene with Cheese. I was really excited by it because it was a nice bit of... I think everyone enjoys the drug scene a lot more than the docs when they watch through the first time. And it was a really nice injection of life into that part of the show. And I was like, oh, this guy's great. He's frightening and very powerful. And he just, every time I saw Cheese after that, he was never the same. He never sort of held my interest in the same way. So that scene's always going to stick with me, I think. So I'm going to pick Cheese, as you did. And
just the normalization of this criminality, the fact that just two cars pulling up, robbing, beating this guy, stealing his car, like it's just you get so desensitized to it. I really had to remind myself in that scene. I was like, this is very much kind of happening.
Yeah, how would you feel if you were really, in Ziggy's position there? It's easy to see action scenes on telly and let them go by, but you really do have to put yourself into his shoes there, and they do a good job of helping you with that by keeping the camera in the car as Cheese approaches and the two cars approach. Yeah,
it's good. You kind of feel trapped with Ziggy there.
Yeah. Right.
So that's episode 5, yeah.
I'm very excited for next week, which it's my favourite episode of season 2 coming up. All prologue.
Yes, and it has some of the best scenes, or certainly the most notable scenes, not just in season 2, but I think maybe in the whole show.
Yeah, there's a lot of really important stuff that happens all in one go next week, so I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for joining us again. Do feel free to drop us an email at caughtonthewire@gmail.com, as our previous contributors have done. And check out the website. I'm going to put that Style in the Wire video up on the blog at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. I've been meaning to do that, but I will definitely do it this time. And we are definitely looking forward to episode 6, so please join us for then. Until then, enjoy your week.
What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore? Baltimore. What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore?